Hello and welcome everyone to another Sales Hacker webinar. Thanks for hanging out with us for the next hour or so. My name is Scott Barker. I run partnerships and revenue at Sales Hacker, and I am an evangelist for Outreach.io. And I'll be moderating this discussion today. And I don't know about you, where you're at in the world, but it's a beautiful summer day where I'm at. So I'm feeling pretty good today. And we're incredibly lucky to have, the dream team back together again. We had an incredible discussion last week on our first executive session ever that we've done on Sales Hacker. And last week, we were talking all about diversity and alignment. More on the alignment piece for part one. And it was all about alignment challenges revenue teams are currently facing and how to solve for them. So if you missed it, don't worry. Anyone who signed up for this webinar will also get part one. So we're going to be sending it out as a bundle when we wrap up today. It takes about 24 hours to get it out. But today, we're going to be tackling another issue, a really big issue, arguably an even more challenging one, and oftentimes can be a little bit sensitive to talk about. But I think if any progress is going to be made in this arena, we need to have open, honest discussions about this and not shy away from this topic at all. So we decided to bring together these three top execs and try and tackle diversity and inclusion in revenue teams today. And it's going to be a tough one to get through, but we've got about 45 minutes to an hour to tackle it, so we're going to do our best. And before I reintroduce my three guests, super quick housekeeping again. So this will be recorded. You'll get part one and part two in your inbox within about 24 hours. And of course, just like that last time, we want this to be as interactive as possible. So if you have any specific challenges that your team is dealing with as it pertains to diversity, please let us know. Jump on the Q&A section. You can find it down there. At the bottom of Zoom, introduce your name, title, a company you work for, and whatever challenge that you're currently facing. And now that I've got that out of the way, I am joined by Anna Baird, the COO of Outreach. I'm joined by Patrick Morrissey, the CMO of Altify, and Nadia Rashid, the VP of Sales at Seismic. Anna, Patrick, Nadia, thank you for joining us again.
Good morning.
Thanks, Scott.
Good morning. Excited for this one. And for those who maybe didn't join us last time, I do want to do just the quick roundtable introductions again. So if you don't mind, can you add just a little bit more color to your background for the sake of the audience? And Nadia, let's start with you.
Sure. Currently the VP of Sales for the East region here at Seismic, so a sales enablement platform. Prior to this, spent nearly 5 years at Marketo and went through 2 exits with them. They were acquired by Adobe recently. And then prior to that, spent a lot of time at fast-growing SaaS companies. So from Pros, Webinato, and that's pretty much my background.
Awesome. Lucky to have you. And moving on to Anna.
Yeah, Anna Baird. I'm the COO at Outreach. I've been in Silicon Valley for 25 years, so I'm a tech girl. Started with KPMG and was the global lead partner for Google pre-IPO for 7 years, doing consulting for them as well as Intuit and others. Then ended up working at McAfee as a senior vice president and sold them to Intel. And then I decided to go do startups and build that foundation, and couldn't be prouder of the work we're building and what we're doing at Outreach. So.
Amazing. And last but not least, Patrick.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate being here. I'm Pat Morrissey. I am the CMO at Altify, and we're in the business of customer revenue optimization, helping companies sell more strategic and drive value in every interaction. In past lives, I've had both marketing leadership roles at places like Salesforce and Business Objects, as well as I'm a recovering sales leader as well. So, and early in my career, I've been in the Bay Area for about 20 years and been in technology for the last 20 years. But early in my career, I started off in advertising, originally from the Midwest.
Awesome. And how's that recovery going from being a sales leader?
It's pretty good. The good news about that is, the content of my character is not judged wholly by my revenue number, but, I also have a huge appreciation for anybody who holds a quota and is out in front of customers every day. So it's a pretty good spot to be in.
I can imagine, yeah. Must make you a much more empathetic marketing leader, maybe, with that focus. All right, well, let's dive into this. And before we get into the topic, I do want to do a really quick poll. I think it's just really important to understand who's joining us today. So we're going to do a really quick poll of just what is your role at your organization? Are you an individual contributor that's looking to be maybe a diversity champion, or are you a manager, or are you, director level and above, and you're really looking at this from a high level and trying to make big changes throughout your org? And we will close it up in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Interesting. So today we have a bit of a different crowd than we did have last week. Last week it was a little bit more on the individual contributor side. Today we have 47% of the attendees right now are director level and above. So a lot of directors, a lot of executives joining us, 27% coming from that manager level, and then another 27% coming from individual contributors. So that should help us frame this conversation as we go. Thank you, everyone, for getting involved in that. Okay, so my first question, before we get into it, I think we have to kind of set the stage, because I want to say that we're extremely lucky, I think, that this topic is getting a lot of attention these days, because people weren't always talking about inclusion and diversity. This was not always a big topic, especially in the world that we all live in, which is tech. So, and I want to go with you on this question first. In your career, do you have examples of, the opposite of non-inclusive work environments and the effect that it had on your experience and just the overall culture?
Obviously, I've been in Silicon Valley for 25 years, so yes, lots of them. But I think really it's, you take a step back and there absolutely is, and we still see them today, I think is the most important. I can talk about the examples for me, but what it is today, I think it's almost also, and I'm going to do an example because I think people will relate to this. It hits on, I think, another thing that we may touch on, but you have diversity and inclusion, right? So you're bringing people in and you're saying, how do you make them feel inclusive in an environment? And that is the most critical piece of it. You might be able to get to hire somebody, but how do you make them feel inclusive once they're inside? And, we have teams where we've said, companies like, okay, you don't have very much diversity on your team. Let's really focus on recruiting and hiring some diverse talent so that we get, diversity of thought and obviously true diversity of what we're representing as a company. And you bring them in, and then it's like, okay, we hired our first woman. We're so excited. We have a woman on the team now, and all the guys still go play poker together on Thursday afternoon at 3, and this woman doesn't play poker. And so you're already immediately making her feel like, okay, you're not part of the team. Mm-hmm. So the inclusive of how you think about the things that you're doing, the events that you're doing, even, from how you even are wording a job rec and job description online and the words we use to attract diverse talent. But I think it is also the inclusiveness, because all the examples I could give are all about not feeling included, right? Mm-hmm. They're, silly things, which was not silly at the time, being told that I couldn't wear pants when I had a pantsuit and I needed to wear a skirt because I should not be showing up to work in pants. That was a real thing. That my open-toed shoes, I couldn't have, my toes showing in my shoes at work because that was inappropriate. Those kinds of things happened, and they are real. But it is, how do you make people feel like they belong no matter what they're bringing into the workplace? And today, obviously, in the culture we have, and especially in Silicon Valley and the West Coast, I work between Silicon Valley and Seattle, you have this much more liberal, obviously, view of things. But even still here, that challenge of how do you make people feel like they're included? How do the meetings, the way we talk in meetings, who we invite, events that we hold, and how do we make sure that they're things that the most of our people will enjoy, and how do we make sure we're feeling like those who might not, what do we do for them to make them feel a part of it as well? And I think that is the most critical component of them.
Absolutely. And it's like, to your point of, it seems like everyone has woken up, it's much more liberal, and like people are paying attention and want these changes, but we're also fighting against this 25 years of this being the way. So you also mentioned something around just like wording, which not everyone thinks about. The wording a job description, how that can turn, genders, different races, different walks of life, cultures off by just the way that you're wording it. And so Nadia, I want to go to you on that question. What are some things, if I'm writing, maybe I'm in HR or I'm looking to write my description, that are maybe wording that we should just leave behind and not use on sales teams anymore? Can you walk through any examples of that?
For sure. So during my time at Marketo, we had a very big initiative, right? We actually hired someone that was driving our inclusion and diversity. And one of the things, we're like, hey, we hired you. You're a woman of color. We're expecting people will come and work for you. And that actually wasn't the case early on, right? We then went to the rec and we noticed that there was a lot of verbiage in there that would actually turn women off. And then we went to our website and we noticed that everyone on the website looked the same, right? Like Caucasian, male. And so there's a lot of things that we did to, and I don't want to use the word soften up our job description, but we had things in there like we have a phenomenal paid mat leave program, like just add certain things there, add flexible schedule. Instead of just like we're a hardcore sales environment, which we certainly were, but there was some verbiage in there that I think as a woman reading it, they could be turned off, right? Maybe they're a woman that has a family or has things going on. And so we added some verbiage specifically even that we like to promote people from within. And then we circulated it internally. We even had an external company look at it. There's now software, to my knowledge, that looks at a job description and looks for keywords, right? And I'll actually spit out what type of individual is this basically written for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there definitely is. Does anyone on this webinar know what that software is called? I've definitely heard of it. It's just
I was just talking to somebody about it the other day. It's funny you said that. I'll see if I can find it really quick.
Yeah. I'll, anyway, okay. Because it is amazing. I was talking about it too, and I was like, that's genius. So Patrick, I'd love to get your opinion on this as well. You've been in tech a while, and you kind of come at this from a bit of a different angle. And so I want to know the effects that you've seen and the changes that you've seen from when we went from non-inclusive work environments to now slowly getting more diverse and inclusive.
Well, I think that a little bit of that, Scott, depends on the individual organization and how committed they are, how much it's really baked into the culture. Because I think in the generic, everyone's in favor of diversity or inclusion. Nobody's going to say that that's a bad idea, right? But then, when I talk to other women, and particularly, and I'm actually interested in Anna and Nadia's feedback on this, and you start to ask women, what are they looking for, what's important, and do they feel valued? Well, the first thing they do is go to the leadership page on the website and find out how many people on the board and how many of senior leaders are women, right? That's a tell. Much less and more broadly, in inclusion. But I think the other thing that I notice that I myself and others are more aware of is we need to be a little bit more thoughtful about the way we talk. And when I say that, I think you oftentimes in Silicon Valley gets a deserved bad rap for being a little bit of bro culture. But how many times just in an informal greeting, it's like, how are you guys doing? Well, there are 5 women sitting across the table from you. By definition, they're not guys, right? It's a small thing, but it goes into, particularly in the sales hacker community, or sales more broadly has always been thought of, or has traditionally been thought of, I should say, as more of a man's game. And so how often do you run into the analogy of, well, the salesperson is the quarterback of the team? Generally speaking, I don't run into too many women who've played quarterback, right? So there's this whole way we kind of talk, or this bias that we have sometimes that I think gets in the way of really, one, communicating, but two, doesn't recognize that all these kind of, tired, oversimple, particularly from a male perspective, ways of communicating get in the way of, who's at the table and what are we trying to get done?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And I
absolutely.
think that's a good point, because a lot of companies, right, and individuals, it's non-intentional. People are just not cognizant of it.
Yep.
And being a female, sometimes I say it as well, right? Like, how are you guys doing, knowing that more than half of my team, is female. So I think a lot of it is just being aware and cognizant of it. It's very unintentional is the way that I like to describe it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know I've always been taught in my career, whenever there's those things that you can't quite catch that you're doing, is just inverse them. And then you can quickly see how, like, next time you walk into a boardroom full of men, say, hey, gals, how's it going? You know, you're going to get a reaction for sure. And then you kind of see how silly that it's always been. And it just became the norm somewhere, you know, along the way. So this next question is a kind of a beast of an issue, and has a lot of different variables. So take it where you will. But Anna, I'll go back to you on this one. What do you think are some of the things that are holding organizations back from fully embracing diversity, inclusion, and not just embracing it, but having a fully diverse and inclusive culture across the board?
And I think it's a couple things we've touched on, but I really do think we focus a lot on the recruiting and the diversity, and then how do you actually keep those people and how do you make them feel a part of the team, right? So that is the harder part. It is easier to probably find them and get them to, you know, sell them and convince them to come to the company. And it's a harder thing to make them feel like they're part of it. And that's the piece I think where everybody falls down. And, you know, we're trying to do some things to address that. I mean, we're only a 4.5-year-old company. We've obviously grown like crazy. We have hundreds of people now, and it is time to say, and what I will tell people too on this call and others is, you know, we're a young company, but we already have an outreach women's network, which is called OWN, intentionally so we stole it from Oprah. But it was started not by leadership. It was started by grassroots team women, young women actually, on some of our teams saying, hey, we're going to start an outreach women's network. Our SDRs started Gals and Sales, which I love too. So on our sales team,
Solid name.
I know, it's such a solid name. I love it. They started Gals and Sales. They have women sales leaders come talk to that team. And then we also have a diversity inclusion group that we use to actually talk about culture at the company, period, which I think is a great way to utilize. So you're automatically bringing a diverse viewpoint because you're using that committee to talk. But we also started some things with, you know, we hire diverse talent, and for all of our talent, we're bringing saying 30, 60, 90 days, how is it going? How are you feeling? How are you feeling about your manager? How are you feeling about the company? So how are we holding ourselves accountable and our hiring managers accountable for also saying, you brought them here, how are you making them successful? And that's across the teams, but especially as you look at some of our diverse talent and making sure they're feeling. So we're kind of trying to gear questions towards that as we look at some of the survey responses and checking in with them, and also having HR check in to say, make sure that they're onboarding well. It is making sure that we're doing some things like that to say, how are we being more inclusive? And it's obviously training managers and leaders to say, how are you thinking about the way you talk, to what Nadia and Patrick were hitting on, but how are you also making sure the events that you're planning for your team is making everybody feel like they can participate? And that is also critical. So whether that's a team offsite or it's a social event that's being planned, how do you make sure that you are always thinking top of mind, is this something everybody can participate in?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Bring up a good point. You know, I started my career in oil and gas, and a lot of this stuff was so right. And that was just the thing to do, not to say that women don't enjoy golf, but it's been interesting because a lot of the team events, I usually have my teams nominate what it is they want to do. And during my time at Marketo, we had more than 85% of my East Coast sales team being female, leadership included, my frontline leaders as well. And so they would come up with things like, we want to go to the spa, or we want to get our nails done. And then I had like probably 10 men, and they're like, guys, that's not being inclusive. And I was like, well, guys can't get pedicures, but I completely understand the whole
guys
thing.
Need pedicures.
Arguably more so. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you bring up a phenomenal point there around it's what we do afterward, right? Once they're there, how to make them feel included, and it goes further than just like onboarding and checking in. But I agree with everything you say.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's also an element here that goes back to, like anything in sales or in leadership, is if it's not measurable, if it's not tied to something that you're paying attention to, that it's a lot like going to the gym. We can all agree that's a good idea and that's probably good for me, but whether or not I have a subscription doesn't mean I got there 3 times this week, right? Mm-hmm. So is there some process and some things that are tied to a scorecard or tied to either just when we think holistically about metrics, you see bigger public companies now moving to publicly talk about what does diversity look like in hiring roles across their company, across multiple different dimensions. And you also start to see, I think, when you look at the list of the best companies to work for, more often than not, what comes through is culture. And so part of this is there's got to be at a senior level, but also more broadly for lots of people through the company who are culture carriers, that diversity's got to be one of the things that becomes amplified and becomes a lens that you evaluate in a whole bunch of dimensions, from who are we going to hire on the team to where should we invest resources and programs to what does training and enablement look like, and can we help support some of the people who are already on the team who are passionate about one or multiple communities and really elevate and lean into what they're doing, if you will, to help provide some more momentum. Mm-hmm. All those things are important, and I think a lot of those things are grounded in culture.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so, so what I'm hearing is a lot of the challenge comes really from the retention piece. And one interesting point that I just had, it was last week or 2 weeks ago, with a female sales leader. And she was talking about how frustrated she was. And going back to the retention thing, she was brought onto a team, and then she almost felt like she was paraded around, right? As the whether you're the first or second person of color, or you're a woman, and now you're this culture champion. And she was talking to me, she's like, I'm just a badass sales leader. That's what I love to do. And I'm really good at it. And I get put on, let's say, these panels or these things, and I don't even get to talk about what I'm the best at. And so there was almost this frustration there, which is something I never really thought about. How do you make sure that you have champions within your organization, but also make it okay that if that's not your calling, that's not your calling? And Nadia, have you ever come up against anything like that?
Yeah, I actually have personally, right? But for me, and right, everyone has their own agenda. I think it's a good platform, right? I think that naturally people want to come and work for women. If you're a woman, or if you're, someone of color, then it's sometimes easier. Like when you think about all sorts of things, just not female and male. Yeah. That person has to be bought into that as well, right? And if that's not their agenda of change, then I absolutely respect that. I've certainly brought people into my organization and said, like, look, I could put them on a pedestal and probably drive more, whatever it may be, drive more people internally. But if that's not their calling, then, I understand that. For me, I love the platform that, if I get out there, then I know naturally women will just tend to apply to more jobs that I have, right? Like I see Anna's in this badass role. I would love to work for a female in that capacity, right? So that would drive me to her if I was on Outreach's website. And so I think it's just a personal preference, but that person ultimately needs to be bought in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Anna, you had some interesting points when we were talking about this webinar, doing some light brainstorming on. There's a couple ways you can look at it, right? You can go and you can find that woman sales leader who wants to be a champion, or that person of color who wants to be a champion. But there's also, a lot of men who maybe fit the demographic of, maybe not exactly who, they're not diverse at all. But sometimes those can be some of the best champions. Maybe they're 100% bought in, and that's all they want to do. They're 100% on that mission because they've seen the importance of it, both the business aspect and the culture impact. Do you want to talk through that a little bit, Ed?
Yeah, I think, it's a reality of the world, right? You are not going to get, and it's funny as even Nadia was talking, we talk about at several of the companies I've worked at, but one of the challenges you have is you have this person you put on a pedestal, look, we have a person of color, we have a woman or whatever, and then you burn them out because you keep saying, okay, can you interview this person because we have a woman? Can you interview? And you can't have the same person do everything, right? You've got to figure out how do we also spread the wealth to make sure, and often you're going to have people who are not diverse that come in, but it is one of the things I said, are they diversity friendly, right? Are they diversity supportive? Mm-hmm. Are they a voice for diversity, even though they're not a diverse person? It's like, we were talking about this with Patrick as we started this call. And so as we look for people, especially managers or leaders, when we're hiring somebody who is not a diverse candidate, we're hiring a white male for a role. One of the things I look at is when we look at references is who have they hired, who was on their teams, what do their diverse candidates say about them, to really make sure that you are continuing the mission, right? Because the mission has to be everybody's mission, not just the diverse candidates that are in the company. And so are you hiring people who are true diversity proponents, and they have demonstrated that in their past, so that you are bringing on somebody who is going to, again, be part of the mission. We have diversity, we have gals and sals, and we have white sales leaders white men who are sales leaders who come to those events and love them too. And it's phenomenal. And the women who are there love that, right? They love that there's these guys coming to these events and participating and being part of the discussion. And that is critical. So, yeah.
Well, and it's also, frankly, good business. If you flip the frame for a second, and let's assume for a second that there might be people who are listening to this or watching this that are not on board with diversity and all this, fluffy stuff. We actually did, as part of the last several years, we've done the customer revenue optimization benchmark. We did a study trying to figure out what does good look like in sales and how do you optimize revenue and move more quickly. And several things that really get to the heart of this that came out of that study include things like 38% of respondents. So you've got more than 600 people in global businesses of all sizes. 38% of the people who responded say they actively evaluate a company's diversity track record when they're making purchasing decisions.
Absolutely.
That's number one. So if you're not paying attention to this, you're exposed against a competitor who is. Number two, that more broadly, they would say that diversity matters, whether it's making a purchasing decision or it's thinking about where do I want to spend time in my career. And maybe most astonishingly, the big aha in terms of why is this notion of diversity and inclusion good for business is that the CRO benchmark, the response is if the company, what the respondents reported was that if the company had a good to great track record in diversity and inclusion, their sales cycles were 25% faster versus the competition. 25%. So anybody who's ever run a sales forecast call or looked at a pipeline can do, some third grade math and figure out that diversity is good. This is fundamentally good for business. And so, it's in everybody's interest, selfishly, frankly, to be thinking as, part of the core of your hiring profile, regardless of whether you're in technology or not. How do we get more voices and more perspectives on the team that's going to help us move faster?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I will say though, we all say we want to be a part of the whole diversity and inclusion, but I think a lot of companies either one, they're not cognizant of it. I want to go back to that, or there's this level of fear of change, right? It's almost like things are working and people tend just naturally to hire people that are like-minded, look like them, etc. And I think that it's really hard, right? Unless there are specific sort of goals as a larger company, you have your CEO and executives backing it. I think those are some of the challenges within organizations where this isn't getting a lot of progress across the board. But I agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think your point, Patrick, too, with just in that survey as well, is that you are selling to companies that you need to look like them, right?
Yes.
Who's sitting around the table that you're selling to, you need to look like them. And that's why it's so critical. I was just in a meeting in Boston a few weeks ago, and I'm not kidding you, it was kind of awesome, but they had 10 people on their side, and it was 70% women that were sitting around that table. I was like, okay, this rocks, but and so it was awesome, obviously, to be part of that. But you could tell they were excited that we had women on our side who were part of the conversation. It just, again, it's okay, yeah, they get this. They're like us. They hire like we do. And that is also important and something that we're sellers, right? You want to be in front of them with the right profile in everything you do. And that is also who's sitting at the table.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, it seems it's now just, out there as a fact that diverse and inclusive teams just win more. And Patrick, so the CRO benchmark survey, where can people find that? That sounds like a super interesting survey.
Yeah, so you can download that at altify.com, and we also post it. We've put links to that in LinkedIn and on Twitter, et cetera, or we'll put it on Twitter now, so it's easy for everybody to find on our handle. But if you go into the research area, you can on our website you can download it.
Nice. And I just want to reiterate those 2 points that you said for anyone who is a diversity champion listening to this and trying to build more of a business case. You said 38%. Of teams will look into a diversity track record when making a purchase. That's crazy. And then
Yep.
the second one was you are 25% faster teams getting to win with the strong diversity track record.
Exactly. Deals
gotta
close 25% faster. The average sales cycle, as reported by the survey respondents, was 148 days. If you had an okay to poor record on diversity, those who said they had a good to great record on diversity in terms of their organization reported that their average sales cycle was 111 days.
Wow.
So I don't know any sales leader worth her salt who wouldn't be killing themselves trying to get to a fraction of that improvement, much less a full 25% improvement.
Yeah, absolutely. Very cool. Thank you for sharing those stats. Those are awesome. So I want to talk a little bit about, there's always this balance between growing extremely fast and hiring and making sure that you're getting as many diverse people in the funnel as possible. I think it's always a really big balance. And we've had, like we talked about, years and years of inequality. So to balance that out, do we have to take drastic measures to fix it when it comes to hiring? And if so, where do you start there? And Nadia, I'll lead with you.
For sure. And I think, drastic measures, it's a case by case based on each specific organization. I've seen things where, we're trying to diversify, and what we'll do, and we'll ask HR to do it, is to actually black out someone's name, address, where they went to school, any of that information, where we could probably come to a determination, male, female, ethnic background, etc. So I think it really depends on the organization, right, and where they're at. That's a really big thing. I think that, again, it has to be very intentional if you're trying to make a change. There has to be a plan. You have to come back and be able to measure the plan. But those are things that I've often seen have worked.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. So basically just making sure there's no room for bias whatsoever in anything that the hiring manager is seeing. Patrick, yourself, over at Altify, how do you look at this when you're told, hey, you need to make 5 hires yesterday? How do you go about doing that when you also have this diversity initiative going as well?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things here. One is that particularly when you get to a level like, Nadia and I are, like, hiring is something, talent recruitment is something you're doing all the time, every single week. So it's important to take the long view, because where this falls down is I just got to find a body. Right. Well, nobody wants a body. They want a great athlete and somebody they can grow, and somebody who, in diversity of, or lots of different roles, not just a sales role. Right. So part of it is trying to take more of a portfolio and a longer term approach to say, where are we sourcing candidates from, and how do we make sure that we get, the best and the brightest, as well as how are we consistently going back to our employees, particularly those who are involved in a lot of other things, and say, who else can you bring? Who else do you respect that you've worked with? Because we all know, fundamentally, that the best recruits we're going to have, and the people who are going to stay the longest and perform the best, come from our own network. Because regardless of their background, if they can, if they're respected, if they're intelligent, if they replicate the culture and they're a good fit, lots of goodness happens. So part of it is not getting too wrapped around the axle about, trying to manufacture a big program, and starting from, what's the scoreboard look like today? What are the different, elements of diversity as well as inclusion and growth we want to enable across our organization? And how do we invite everybody to participate in helping us solve the problem and helping us drive, the right sort of diverse team that is going to help us, to Anna's point earlier, reflect back, the customers and the people that we do business with.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. Have you ever seen referrals backfire, though? Like, if you have a team that looks a certain way, they may hang out with other people that look a certain way, and they may refer people that also look that way. Have you ever seen that line of thinking backfire at any organizations you've been a part of?
100% I have, and I think that's where you need to have multiple, across roles. The thing that I think counteracts that is you've got to have a structure in terms of your hiring process to have different people evaluating different skills and characteristics and traits, and put a little thought into who's asking what, and in big groups and small groups, as well as the place where I've seen it work best, frankly, to counteract that is a lot of high-performing organizations have some sort of either direct or implicit rule, which is if somebody says no, then by definition, the candidate's out. Right. So they can't be, when you get into groupthink and you get in too many people with the same thing, then you need to have more roles, more levels at the table. You need to have a structured process, and you need to have a way inside of the system to allow people to give feedback, the net of which might be, you know, they have the skills, they have the background, they have the resume, but they're not going to be a good fit here. And so, you know, I need to be able to say no on hiring and make sure my boss and my boss's boss reinforce that, so we get the right kind of fit that's going to help us with culture and some of the softer things that make the business go day to day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great points. Nadia, Anna, anything to add there?
It's interesting
because
sorry. It's interesting because, as Pat was mentioning, like, you have this panel of people that go through the interviewing process, and everyone's looking for certain behaviors and traits, etc. And one of the things that comes up is, are they a good cultural fit? And for me, I tend not to weigh heavily there, right? A cultural fit is, you know, do they have the same beliefs? Do we think alike? Like, would they fit in with kind of what we have going on? And so for me, although I think about it, it's very much at the bottom of my sort of hierarchy when we think about skill set, et cetera. And so ultimately, like, we do want to drive more diverse candidates into the pool, but we're ultimately going to hire the best candidate. But for like my sort of structure, when we're bringing people within the organization, I actually think culture is less of a sort of priority, because people will tend to say, if they don't have similar interests, they don't look like me, then why should they be a part of the group, right? And so then they'll find ways to perhaps exclude them. So that's been my experience.
Yeah. And I think one of the things you also have to, and Patrick can hit on this, it depends on the culture of the company, whether a cultural fit is you know, the right thing or not. I think your point, Nadia, is well taken. I think it just depends on the team they're on. And if that team is diverse and the culture is diverse, that could be a cultural fit, could be a big thing. But I think one of the things that is really important, and I remember there was a CEO of a public company, and she said she'd been at has started several startups, you know, and obviously had finally taken this company public. And we said, what's the one piece of advice you give to yourself back when you were starting? She was, don't hire too fast. You're not going to get the right people. Yeah. And the problem with diversity as well is that the first 5 people who walk through the door, who have the skill set and talent, could be 5 great people who will totally do the job that you need, who have the background and the experience, and they could be perfect, but they're probably not going to be diverse, because the population that you're talking to is going to be a lot of one kind of person, and then there's going to be a chunk of people who represent the diversity. So you have to be patient. You have to do all the things that Nadia and Patrick have talked about, of activating the network within the company to go find people who have, you know, some of this background, your board and others to help you with that, depending on the levels. But it is also patience. We have to, you know, utilizing recruiters and others, make sure we're bringing in, it's like the first 5 people, though they may all be great and you're in pain because you want to fill that role, we don't hire the first 5 because you're holding out to say, let's see what diversity candidates come through, because they will, and they'll be incredibly talented. And as talented, it's just not going to be as easy and as fast to find them.
Yep. Great points. Great points. So I wanted to get into some specific examples at each of your organizations about examples of diversity initiatives. But before we get there, and this is one of the more difficult questions, I think. So we talked about speed, and when you really need to get butts in the seats, you know, and you're slowing down, you're getting more candidate pools. That's awesome. What do you do? And I guess this comes down to, do you believe in a total meritocracy at your respective org? And how does that fit within an equality initiative? Let's say you have candidate A, 100%, everyone's on board, they will crush it. Or you have candidate B who's 97% of the way there, but maybe fits more of a diverse cultural background that you have deemed extremely important at your organization. What do you do in that scenario? And it's a difficult question, but you go with candidate A or candidate B. And Anna, I think I'll go with you on that one. I'll put you in the hot seat.
Great, thanks. I wanted Patrick to take that one. No, I think, There's, I don't want to get, 97% there, I would probably go with a diverse candidate. So just to be honest, I'm going to go with a diverse candidate. They're 90, if they have sheer talent and they're 97% of the way, I'm going to go with a diverse candidate because I need to your point, we have to create more momentum in that side, and it's going to be attractive to, because the benefit to the organization well makes up for that 3%. The benefit to our customer base, the benefit to the teams. I'm not going to hire somebody who's not the right fit for the company just because they're diverse. I wouldn't do that. But I do think, I was thinking about your question on the meritocracy thing. It is being patient to make sure that you get enough candidates in pipeline so you're starting to see more diversity so you can choose a phenomenal candidate who hopefully is 100% and they are diverse. Because that has happened almost every time for me. I have to tell you, as long as we're patient, and it is so hard, we get phenomenal talent in the door. But on the flip side, I think one of the things also, I was talking to one of my other leaders today on this, and one of the things he said is, do you see raw talent in the person, and can we teach them a little bit of the experience they may not have?
Yep.
And that is one of the things you also have to realize, and women especially do this. They will, and women talk about it all the time, and we still do it. It is, I am 90% qualified, and I'll talk like I'm 60% qualified because I feel like that 10% difference is so big. A man will be 90% qualified, and he'll talk like he's 120% qualified for that job. And as an interviewer, as somebody who is talking to candidates, you also have to suss that out a bit. I literally talked to a woman who is from a huge consulting group that has a phenomenal brand. I was talking about a role, and she was downplaying herself every single question I asked. And I was pushing her hard. I was trying to sift through that because she has a phenomenal role. She is clearly very talented. And she was downplaying why she wasn't qualified for the role that I was talking to her about. Every single question. It was a little crazy, but it happens. And I think as interviewers and as companies, you also have to realize you're sussing through that too. The way they talk about themselves, you've got to get through that and say, what is the real experience and what's the raw talent there? And can I get them there? And I will take a bet on raw talent a lot of the time if I feel like I have the ability to teach and the capacity on the team to teach. I will also evaluate from that perspective. So
I really like that way of looking at it, because even when they're through the interview process, that still happens. Like we've all read that Harvard Business Review where it's, women will only apply for jobs that they have 100% of the credentials for, and men will, I think it's like 3 out of 10 points. Men are like, oh yeah, for sure. And that will happen not only just applying, but also through the interview process, right? So I think that's a really good way to look at it. The 97% could be 110. And they're just maybe need some confidence or some support. That's awesome. Nadia, Patrick, any opposing viewpoints, other ways to look at it?
I would echo everything Anna said. I feel that women just naturally downplay their abilities and skill sets. And I'm trying to create awareness. Like I know that being a female because I've been on the other side, right? But I'm trying to create awareness even amongst the people that are part of that interviewing panel, for example. So they can try to sniff some of that out, right? I tend to find a lot of females just are like less, and I say this with all due respect, like cocky, right? About their achievements, what they're able and capable of doing. And so just knowing that and being aware of it, I think that's a phenomenal point you bring up.
And the point I'd double down on is a little bit, particularly going back to, if you think about sales as a discipline and as a skill set and experience, the CRO benchmark, one of the things that came back that was very interesting is that if you set aside a whole bunch of other factors, all things being equal, that if a woman is a salesperson, their deal size is 10% larger than other. And so one of the things I find that's really encouraging to me, particularly in technology sales too, is how much focus there is on hiring women. Because the meritocracy in sales looks like, let's look at the sales ladder, right? Who's doing well? And I've got countless good examples of where people, and Scott, you and I were talking about this the other day on the podcast, like that Andrew Buckley at Traction was talking about his top sales performers are women. And because they have been able to see that trend over time, they are much more aggressive now in looking to recruit and retain and grow women. And I think that goes back to women, sometimes don't want to be the ones, promoting. They want to be more self-effacing, but those same skills translate into empathy and into better listening and into, going deeper and working harder and really trying to understand not just the business win, but the personal win for the customer. And we see that at Altify as well. Like that, our top salesperson last year was a woman. So if you put this in just purely a sales context for a second, particularly, and just look at the male versus female, I think there's a whole bunch of great research and a whole bunch of great numbers and a whole bunch of great examples that translate to, you want to be more successful, hire more women.
Yeah, I think one of the questions that, love that, one of the questions that sometimes I tend to go to, and it works for all interviews, so it's great, and a lot of people utilize this, but it is, instead of say, tell me why you're qualified for this job and talk to me about, what it says, tell me 2 things that you're super proud of that you've accomplished at a couple of companies. So you get away from telling me why you're qualified, talking about something they're proud of. It's way easier for them to pull that out, and you sometimes then can sift through where they would downplay. You get, because they're talking about that, you said, well, no, I want you to be proud of it. So they're already kind of going, okay, well, I was really proud when I did this thing. And you kind of start to suss through then that bias they have to maybe downplay their capabilities. And then so talking about something, a super hard situation that you really worked through and that you feel like had a great outcome for the company. It helps in interviews then to just get some of that bias out of how they might want to talk about themselves. It's been something that I've seen has been a little bit successful just as a tactic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really nice reframe, because you're almost giving them permission to be proud, to be confident in their abilities. I like that. Okay, so we have another difficult question from the community this time. This is from Jessica Mikanani. Jessica, thank you so much for your question. And the question is very much in line with what we're talking about right now. And Patrick, I'll put you on the hot seat first. How do you counteract reverse discrimination, especially when not hiring the first few people that come through? Like, you get a few, one's awesome, and you have to say, hold on, not right now. We got to look for more.
Yeah, I think I would say there's a couple elements, and I'm certainly interested in Nadia and Anna's feedback about this as well. But I think there's, going back to the point that Anna raised earlier about not being too fast to go. And I was just with a salesperson the other day, a couple weeks ago, and he was telling me the story about being deep in a hiring process. And then he got the call back where he thought he was going to get hired. The guy wanted to meet him in person. And he got to the interview or he got to what he thought was the interview. And the guy said, look, I like you. You've got the skills, you've got the background. I think you do really great here. Bottom line is, I need a woman on my team. And this guy's response at the first level was, hey, okay, you could have just told me that on the phone. But there was a real conscious bias of saying he was joining a big team. They were 100% male, and the sales leader had enough wherewithal to be both transparent about what was going on, but also to say, hey, I know this doesn't serve me going forward. And the bottom line here is there's no perfect candidate. There's no perfect candidate. So it's more about taking a long view of trying to look at what do we need? What does the organization need? I love the comment about can you grow them and start to think about some of the other, I always bucket these things in skills and traits. What are you looking for that's going to help not just for any individual role, and then look at what does that look like across the whole of the business?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. Nadia, anything to add there?
I would say I'd probably look at why those people weren't hired on, right? Was it just timing, or was it they just didn't have the skill set? I love the whole thing on if there's raw grit and talent there, then we can up level them and invest in them. But for me, when I look at certain recs I have open, specifically frontline leader roles, I want to interview X amount of people, right? I want to get X amount of people on the phone. I want to get X amount of people in front of me. And so I'm pretty transparent about the entire process with candidates. You're either early or look, you're my second candidate. We're still trying to build that funnel. I like our conversations. Let's continue down the path. And I think setting the stage so people understand that. And then you're able to assess hey, of these 10 people that we brought on board or brought in for interviews, which one of them, is the best fit, both short-term and long-term, and just communicating that out. But I think in that specific scenario, figuring out, did they actually have the chops or, the skill sets that you're looking for or that you wanted to invest in?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there's no shame, and I think it's a great question, but there's no shame in going, and I love the way you put that, Nadia, and I've done the same. It's like, look, we're going to we want to get at least 10 candidates for the panel to assess. So we're continuing to look. We're going to keep you posted on our process. Because I'm not going to hire, and we shouldn't, obviously, hopefully to the point we were talking about earlier, the third person who walks in the door who is seems like the perfect fit. Because seems like the perfect fit is like, walking into the first ice cream store is like, oh, this is the best ice cream on the street. Well, I don't know. I haven't tried the other 5 ice cream stores, right? So you got to make sure you taste all the ice cream. And then you're like, okay, this is the best ice cream store. But when you look at it, it always shocks me when you have a team, a panel that is interviewing, and you give them 5, 6, 7, 10 candidates, depending on what we're looking for, and saying their views change, what they think is most important changes. That's part of the evolution of understanding what you really want as a company in this role. And therefore, then some of the skill sets may change. So over time, you should never pick your third person coming in the door. You should make sure you have a panel to say, am I getting, to what you said, Nadia, the best fit for the company, the best fit for the role, the best fit for us short-term and long-term.
Yeah. And just one more thought going back to what Nadia said too. I think if there's the suspicion from the person who asked the question that reverse discrimination might be involved, maybe yes, maybe no, that's a great opportunity to go back to the people who hired and ask for feedback. Because generally speaking, I don't see too many candidates that do that. And you get some amazing insights about yourself and how you present, and there's maybe a difference between what you thought you were capable of and what presented to the panel. And generally speaking, I find that, when you invest the time to say, can you give me some feedback or tell me why I wasn't the role, or what did other people say, you might get some things that really help you as you think about what's the next job or the next career or the next move that you're going to make.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There's this theme that it kind of keeps going back to. You have to slow down. It's like speed and desperation are the things that are going to hold you back. I think of it, the only bad meals I've ever had when I'm traveling is when I'm starving. And I'm just like, I'm going to pick that one. And you go to the first tourist trap you see, and it's awful. And then you keep your walk, and you're like, oh, if I just walked a little bit further, there was 10 amazing ones by the water that have good Yelp reviews, whatever, right? And so it's a lot like that. So I want to leave some time for examples, because I think it's really important. I think we have a lot of people joining us that are diversity champions at their organizations. And a lot of times the best way to do something is steal it from someone else who's doing it really well. So Anna, you mentioned a few gals and sals, the own network at Outreach. Do you want to talk through those a little bit more, and any other ones that you have at Outreach?
Yeah, for sure. No, we have a diversity and inclusion committee, which is obviously what we utilize, and I think important. And the one thing I think I just wanted because we have obviously a diverse set of experiences that are on this call, is know that you don't have to wait for a leader to start something. And one of the things I loved about Outreach is that we had a group of young women at the company who started our Outreach Women's Network. It was the first one at our company. And then we had another group of young women who actually on our SDR team who started Gals and Sals. So it was not leaders going, okay, we're going to now take on this new thing. It was the people on the teams going, I want to create inclusion. I want to create an avenue for people to feel like they have a place to be included, and not just because you're not necessarily sitting next to each other. How do we pull that together for events and discussions and development and education as well? So I think what we have really done, those organizations have done just a phenomenal job of really then sitting down, and it's usually I get groups together. So it's 2 or 3. Three seems to be the magic number in my view. 3 people going, I want to start this, and I'm willing to put the time in to help. And then what we've also done is just really start to connect with some of our neighbors at other companies going, okay, what is your women's network or group, and how do we then parlay off each other so you're not putting all the work on one team? And then also starting to recruit from across the organization to say, okay, who else wants to be a part of this and be part of leadership? Because a lot of inclusion networks, whatever it is, tend to have 2 fact patterns. And I was the chair of the Women's Advisory Board at KPMG with 35,000 employees. It was a lot of network going on. But one of the things I'll tell you, the reasons they die is the same people are responsible for everything and they burn out. And so how do you make sure that you are getting enough bandwidth across teams, between companies to help out? So someone's posting when you're not. How do you do that? Definitely get more across the company involved. so that you don't burn the team out. Who is the founding members of this or the leaders of it? And then the second thing is that you can't just have it be social. It also has to be developmental. If it's just social, the people won't come as well. So you're trying to get a groundswell of something that's actually beneficial for the company, and for the people who attend. And so it is making sure that you move from, it starts as social because it needs to be people getting to know each other, and then you start to create developmental, where that's bringing leaders in to talk, leaders from other companies in to talk, recruiters in to talk about how they look and what they look for, whether that's talking about managerial skills and how to have difficult conversations, because that's good for everybody. You start bringing in that developmental component, and I think then you start to truly have something that is a big ROI for the people who attend and for the company, which is always a win-win.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of tactical and practical tips there. Yeah, go ahead.
Here that I've been at organizations, and one specifically when I was at Marketo, it was a man, right, that came to me, and he wasn't one of my direct reports. He came from another team, and he's like, hey, I have this initiative. I know you guys have this like women in tech sales thing, and I want to expand this out and include men and people from other groups within the company. And I said, cool, what do you need from me? Because that's already an initiative that's behind the scenes. And he said, well, we need some budget, because he had some pretty big ideas, and he wanted me to go and find some regular budget that we could pull from. And so that's something that we did. And so one of the things, like all of what Anna said, it's spot on. But as an organization, I think people also need to be cognizant of the fact of like resource allocation, budget, all of that good stuff, and just be ready to invest it. And we're talking, it's very small in the grand scheme of the larger effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that. Yeah, there was tons of really practical advice there. So if you're looking for something, find 3 core people at a very minimum to make sure you don't burn yourself out. Then look for support across different teams and functions so that you kind of spread throughout the organization. And then one of the last ones was make sure it's developmental and not just social, which I think is extremely important. And Pat, I'll go to you on this one. Any examples that you have at Altify that you'd like to share and that you guys are proud of?
Well, I think there's multiple, lots of things to share, but I think a couple things that stick out just from very recent past is we've had people, particularly in our development organization, who've, traveled overseas and went to see, parents, family, et cetera. Then they brought back, food or tea or other things and shared them with everybody else as a way to, share their culture, share their history, share where they come from. So you can find out lots of interesting things by, sitting down with somebody over a cup of tea. Or more recently at Pride, we, like a lot of people did, we changed our logo and we did some social promotion and we got multiple people involved. But interestingly, the person who generated the Pride Altify logo wasn't in marketing. He was in the development organization. And I think it was a great sort of hey, let's make sure that this is something that we celebrate everybody, but also there's nothing better, particularly as a marketer, as having somebody who's coming forward with something that's not just a good marketing idea, but it's good business, and it really celebrates things that are important across the organization. Mm-hmm. So I think that's part of the key here is try to activate the entire network to get everybody to bring their little slice of what's important to them to the party, and really that's going to be a multiplier effect for everyone.
Yeah, that's a good point. And don't overlook those small things, right? Like even just that, like you mentioned, the updating your logo to support Pride. I know Outreach did that. I had probably about 6 people reach out to me over the span of the month and just say how pumped they were that we did that. And to me, it's like, well, that's a no-brainer. Of course we're going to do that. But it does go a long way, especially to those who have maybe struggled in the past. That little symbol can really mean a lot. Yeah, go ahead, Anna.
I was just going to say it was a great highlight, Patrick. I think one of the things that you said, we talk about inclusion and it's across, it's cultures, it's obviously genders, it's and diverse backgrounds. And I think one of the things that was celebrating those, and we talked about Ramadan recently and celebrating the teams who are fasting for Ramadan and talking about what that meant to them and why. Diwali, which is actually, I was just looking up, is October 27th this year, which is the Festival of Lights that's celebrated in India and a lot of other Asian countries, and really bringing the foods and what does that celebration mean and why is it important to that culture, and letting everybody participate in that really brings people together. And it's been so fun. You know, I've been at multiple companies where we've celebrated some of these different holidays, and so we taught an Indian dance, or we put it on YouTube, and you know, there's fun ways to get people engaged and talk about what does this mean to that culture, and then how do you participate. And I think that is just another awesome piece of inclusion that we need to make sure we continue to highlight. So thank you for hitting that, Patrick.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right. Well, that takes us to the hour. I want to thank the three of you again, sincerely. You gave us 2 hours over the last few days, and I know personally I've really enjoyed this discussion. I know we got some excellent feedback throughout, so thank you three very much. And I think down the road we'll have to get the gang back together again and tackle another one of these problems. But thank you. And for everyone who joined us, thank you for the participation, and have an excellent rest of your week.